Hospitals are meant to heal. But what happens when a place of life becomes a place of terror? Some buildings are abandoned for a reason, yet something always lingers. The silence, the empty hallways, the remnants of what once was. It all creates an eerie presence that cannot be ignored. Imagine stepping inside an old health center, its walls still stained with the memories of patients long gone. The air is heavy, thick with an unshakable feeling that you are not alone. Footsteps echo where no one should be walking. Lights flicker, even when the power has been shut off for years. The sound of something dragging across the floor sends a chill down your spine. Tonight, I will take you through the chilling encounters inside one of these abandoned places. Where shadows move on their own, whispers fill the empty rooms, and doors open to reveal things that should not exist. Each story will bring you closer to the truth. Some places never truly die. Stay with me until the very end, because the last story is the most disturbing of all. It will make you question what truly remains in these forgotten halls, and if something is waiting to be found. Story 1. The old health center had been abandoned for years, yet people still whispered about it. Some said strange noises came from inside at night. Others claimed to have seen figures moving through the shattered windows. Mark had heard the stories, but he never believed in the supernatural. He was an urban explorer, always looking for the next adrenaline rush. The rumors only made the place more intriguing. One night, armed with his flashlight and camera, he slipped through a broken side door. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Old medical posters peeled from the walls, and rusted stretchers sat abandoned in the hallways. His footsteps echoed eerily as he moved forward, capturing everything on his camera. Then, he saw it, a single door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. It was marked Patient Room 6 in faded letters. Something about it felt wrong. The other doors were shut tight, yet this one seemed to be waiting for him. He hesitated but stepped inside. The room was empty at first. An old hospital bed sat in the center, its sheets stained and crumpled. Cabinets lined the walls, doors slightly open as if someone had recently searched through them. Mark swept his flashlight across the space, feeling a growing unease. Then, something changed. The bed, the sheets were different. He was sure they had been wrinkled, but now they looked freshly laid. The pillows were plumped, as if someone had just been there. His breath hitched as he took a step back. Had he imagined it? Trying to shake off the unease, he turned toward the door, but when he reached for the handle, it was stuck. No matter how hard he pulled, it wouldn't budge. His pulse quickened. That's when he heard it. The faint rustling of fabric behind him. Spinning around, he shone his flashlight toward the bed. The sheets had changed again. Now, they were pulled back, as if inviting someone to lie down. A deep, unsettling cold spread through the room. The cabinets creaked. One of the doors swung open slowly, revealing nothing but darkness inside. His flashlight flickered, the beam weakening as a strange static filled the air. Then a whisper. Low, unintelligible. Not from the cabinets. Not from the hallway. It came from the bed. Mark felt a wave of nausea. He had spent years exploring abandoned places, but this was different. This wasn't just an empty building. Something was here, watching, waiting, desperate. He turned back to the door and yanked with everything he had. The handle suddenly gave way, sending him stumbling into the hallway. Without looking back, he ran. Outside, the night air felt crushingly heavy. He forced himself to turn and look at the window of Patient Room 6. The bed was no longer empty. A figure lay beneath the sheets, completely still. The door, which he had left open, was now shut. Story 2. Daniel had spent years working as an orderly at the old health center before it shut down. He knew every hallway, every locked door, and every hidden corner of the building. When it was operational, the place had been chaotic, overcrowded, understaffed, and filled with stories no one wanted to talk about. But the operating rooms held the darkest memories. He never liked walking past them, even during the day. There was something wrong with that part of the hospital. Years after it closed, Daniel found himself drawn back. He told himself it was curiosity, a need to see what had become of the place. But deep down, he knew there was something unfinished there, something that had never let him go. One evening, armed with a flashlight in his old keyring, he returned. The halls were empty, filled only with the smell of dust and rot. His footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing off peeling walls and broken ceiling tiles. He moved cautiously, pushing past rusted gurneys and shattered glass. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. Then, he reached the operating room. The heavy double doors were still intact, though the windows were clouded with grime. He hesitated before pushing them open. The moment he stepped inside, the air felt different, thicker, colder. The large surgical table stood in the center, just as he remembered it. Above, the massive operating lights hung lifeless, coated in years of dust. Then he saw it, a single handprint on the table. It was fresh. The smudged outline of fingers trailed down the metal, as if someone had pressed their hand against the surface moments before he arrived. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. No one else was supposed to be here. He swept his flashlight around the room, checking the corners, the old cabinets, the rusted trays. Nothing. The only sound was his own breathing, uneven now, strained. He stepped closer to the table, hesitating before running his fingers over the handprint. It was damp, slightly warm. That didn't make sense. The place had been abandoned for years. A sudden click echoed through the room. He turned sharply. One of the cabinet doors had swung open on its own. He stared at it, trying to rationalize. The air was still, no breeze, no explanation. Then, from behind him, the sound of something sliding against the floor. He turned back to the table. The handprint was gone. The smooth metal surface was untouched, as if it had never been there. His stomach twisted. He backed away, moving toward the door, but a deep creaking sound made him freeze. The operating table shifted ever so slightly. That was enough. Daniel turned and yanked at the door handle, but it wouldn't move. The lock was jammed. Panic surged through him. He pounded against the door, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the building. Then a whisper, low, rasping, barely audible, right next to his ear. He spun around, pressing his back to the door. The room was empty, but something had changed. The cabinet doors were now all open, the trays knocked over, as if someone had violently searched through them. Then, his eyes locked onto the operating table. The sheets were no longer folded neatly. They were pulled back, as if someone had just gotten up. A wave of nausea hit him. He fumbled with the keys in his pocket, trying them one by one, his hands shaking. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices, speaking words he couldn't understand. Finally, the lock clicked, the door burst open, and he staggered into the hallway. Without looking back, he ran, not stopping until he reached the exit. When he reached his car, he turned to face the building. The light from the setting sun cast long shadows across the windows. His eyes moved toward the operating room. There, in the grimy window, was the faint outline of a handprint, exactly where his had been. Story 3. Javier had been a security guard for years, but nothing had ever unsettled him like the night he was assigned to patrol the old health center. The building had been abandoned for over a decade, yet complaints kept coming in. Lights seen flickering through the windows, strange noises echoing in the halls. He assumed it was just kids breaking in or squatters looking for shelter. That night, he was determined to put those rumors to rest. The entrance was easy to force open. The old doors groaned as he stepped inside, flashlight in hand. The air was stale, filled with the scent of mold and decay. The silence pressed against him, thick and unnatural. As he moved through the empty corridors, his boots scraped against dust-covered floors, leaving the first footprints in years. He reached the main hallway, where the nurse's station still stood, covered in peeling paint and scattered papers. A distant sound echoed, soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. He held his breath and listened. Nothing. Probably just the building settling, he told himself. Javier continued down the hallway, checking each room. Most were empty, their beds rusting, curtains swaying slightly in a non-existent breeze. But when he turned a corner, something felt off. The hallway stretched longer than he remembered. He had studied the floor plan earlier, and this section should have led to the emergency exit. But instead, it just kept going. He walked forward, glancing at the room numbers. 102, 103, 104. He walked faster. 102, 103, 104. He stopped. The numbers were repeating. A chill ran down his spine. He turned around, expecting to see the entrance he had come from, but it was gone. The hallway behind him was identical to the one ahead, endless, featureless. The rooms were the same, the air growing heavier with each passing second. His radio crackled to life. Static filled the speaker, but underneath it, a voice whispered his name. He lifted the radio to his mouth, but his hands were shaking too much to press the button. The lights overhead flickered. A shadow moved at the far end of the hallway, its form shifting unnaturally. He shone his flashlight toward it, but the beam barely cut through the darkness. Then the shadow moved fast. Panic took over. He turned and ran, sprinting past the identical rooms, trying to find a way out. The numbers continued to loop. 102, 103, 104. No doors led to the exit. No turns broke the impossible path. Then, suddenly, he slammed into a door. It hadn't been there a second ago. He grabbed the handle, expecting resistance, but it swung open easily. He stumbled into the night air, gasping. The building stood silent behind him, the entrance exactly where it had always been. But when he looked back inside, the hallway was short again, just as it should be. Only one thing had changed. On the dusty floor, next to his footprints, were several others, ones that hadn't been there before. These stories prove that abandoned health centers don't just collect dust, they hold something far more unsettling. Places meant for healing become prisons for memories, whispers, and shadows that refuse to fade. Imagine stepping into one of these forgotten hallways, expecting emptiness, only to feel unseen eyes watching from the dark. What if the air suddenly turns heavy, the silence stretching too long, the shadows moving just a little too unnaturally? Would you dare to walk through a place like this, knowing that some doors lead nowhere and others refuse to stay closed? That some things are still waiting inside, things that were never meant to be disturbed? Have you ever been somewhere that just felt wrong? A place where time seemed to stretch, the air grew thick, and every instinct told you to run? Maybe you brushed it off, convinced yourself it was nothing. But what if it wasn't? What if, in that moment, something was there, watching, waiting? If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't forget to subscribe and share them with someone who loves a good scare. And remember, some places should remain abandoned, because once you step inside, you might not be the only one walking out.